Alright, real quick, gonna do a tier list for the Rise of the Grunts 2 boss roster. Now, I have posted pictures of this before over on the Discord, but I actually didn't do a recording talking about my reasoning, and my opinions have changed because of, patches and stuff to the game. Different patches and bug fixes and stuff. So, yeah, doing this now, again, just because. If you haven't seen the one I did on the first game, it exists, link to it in the description. Yeah. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put the unfinished canned bosses into this category. I don't know if these guys will make it into the final game or not. We'll see. But anyway, let's start with the actual bosses that are finished. Starting with Large Bernard here. Now, do I think Large Bernard is one of the best bosses? No. I'm going to put him in meh for now, because I don't think he's offensive in any way, given that he's the first boss of the first level. So, yeah. Alright, Damien. I'm going to put Damien in good, again, for the same reason. I'll get back to reasoning on these guys later. I'm just setting this as a benchmark so I can compare bosses to them later. Alright, now Aguna. Where do I put Aguna? Aguna's got to be bottom of meh. I've thought about it, and before I would have put him in the bad category, but I've thought about it, and I think he's fine. As an evolution of Large Bernard, being the mini-boss of the second level instead of the first, I don't think Aguna is terrible. You don't want him to be more complex than the boss of the previous level or anything like that. So, I think Aguna being worse than Damien is fine. He's going to be at the bottom of meh, but I don't think he's bad enough to go in bad. At one point, he was my least favorite boss in the game, but he isn't that now. Alright. Envoy. Do I think Envoy's better than Damien? I'm going to say yes, for the simple fact that Damien... there's an argument to be made that Damien is worse than his Rise 1 counterpart. I would disagree with that for the simple fact that Damien's Rise 1 counterpart requires far more waiting than the Rise 2 version. But that argument could be made. With Envoy, he's wholly unique comparatively to anything in Rise 1. I think he's better than Sumer was, as low as that bar is. And I think he serves his job as the second boss fairly well. Now moving on to the Stage 3 Goobuses. The mini-bosses, the mimic dudes. Where do I put these? I guess by default they're better than Aguna. They're not that creative as a concept, but the amount of diversity that goes into them kind of by default, I think would make them better than Aguna, even though Aguna obviously has a more unique moveset, given the fact that all of the mimic dudes are copying another character. But still, I think they're more interesting than Aguna kind of by default, even though from a gameplay perspective, I think Aguna's better. You have 5 things to fight here versus just 1, and there's actually incentive to replay the stage so you can see what they look like. Some people care about that, some people don't. And also, the fight would get more interesting as updates progress if DLC characters get added. They probably won't, but Usurper is in development for Rise 2. He probably won't be finished. We'll see. Now, Nemesis here. Buggy as hell. Nemesis is buggy as hell. That being said, I think he's the best of the bosses from the first 3 levels. He has the most interesting moveset. He has actually proximity-based moves, unlike the other 2, which the only proximity moves they have are basics. He doesn't really have a gimmick, per se. All of his moves, he doesn't really have an overarching gimmick like Envoy does, that Envoy relies on, as Envoy only has, 1 move besides a basic, and he has 2 different basics for some reason, which is weird. But anyway, Nemesis doesn't have a gimmick that he relies on like Envoy does. He's definitely more interesting than Damien, so yeah, I think he should go at top of good. Alright, now we go into the only Stage 4 boss that is finished, Giguna. Now, Giguna's either going to go on top of good or bottom of best. I think he's better than any boss in the first 3 levels. The only issue with him is how just aggressive he is. That's definitely going to get toned down. So once that gets toned down, bottom of best. As I'm going to put him bottom of best anyway. There's not going to be that many characters up here. Alright, now we go into the Stage 5 dudes. The first mini-boss of Stage 5. Friggin' Zevanek and Borvakad, the Sons of Vodokar. I like these guys a lot. I know that might be controversial given how boring they are, from a gameplay standpoint, but I think they work. Having a boss that's mostly focused on projectiles rather than, getting as close to the player as possible, I think that their uniqueness works in this case. I think they work. By default, I think they're the best mini-boss in the game. Now we move on to the Nausea Giant. Nausea Giant goes in bad. Now, he's a worse version of Rise 1 Sumer, essentially. And while I think it's okay, I don't hate the Nausea Giant, or anything like that. I do think by default, mechanically, he's kind of trash. You see, he doesn't really do anything other than one move. So, other than being a set piece, he doesn't really have purpose, but you do fight him directly after Zevnik and Borvikod, which I consider the best mini-boss in the game, and later on in Stage 5, you do have another pretty good boss, so yeah, I feel like that's fair. Now we move on to Eskar. Eskar is the worst boss in the game. Now, Eskar has a basic, he has one other skill, and in the arena with him, there are 3 Agunas. That's it. That one skill he has is cool and all, but he has a pretty low likelihood of doing it. That being said, I don't really feel like making Eskar better or anything, considering what directly follows him, but Eskar still is probably the worst boss in the game. Now we move on to Vodokar. Vodokar is the only boss to have 2... No, he's not. I forgot about Aguna. Vodokar has 2 different boss fights, right? The one that's exclusive to Boss Rush and is his second phase in Boss Rush, and the one that you actually fight in Stage 5 itself and is the final boss of the game. I'm going to rank the Boss Rush one first, because this is, Boss Rush Vodokar is bad. I don't think he's worse than Aguna or anything, but I have, at least from a gameplay perspective, but I have to put him lower than Aguna because of where he is. He's the ultimate boss of the game, and I just don't think he fulfills that role very well. From a friggin' visual perspective, and as a set piece, I think he's the best boss in the game. The whole phase transition thing, yeah, that's great. But I don't think his moveset is particularly unique, which makes sense. He's a refight of Vodokar, so it makes sense for his moveset to be an evolved version of Vodokar. But again, that doesn't mean that I like it. I don't like Vodokar Phase 2. Whatever. Now we move on to Vodokar Phase 1. Yeah, Vodokar Phase 1's the best boss in the game. He has a dynamic moveset. He has interesting animations. Again, the set piece of it all. Yeah, he works. I think he's the best boss in the game. I do think that Giguna may be better from a gameplay perspective in some ways, but again, Giguna has this weird thing where he's way too aggressive for a Stage 4 boss. I think Vodokar hits the balance for final boss well enough. If you were to swap where they were in the game, ignoring the whole, lore implications of that and, appearance, if you were to swap where they were gameplay-wise, I think Giguna would be better than Vodokar. But Vodokar works so much better where he is, and Giguna is far too aggressive for where he is. If I nerfed Giguna, the fight from a gameplay standpoint wouldn't be as interesting. And I am going to do that. But Giguna's placement wouldn't really change if I did do that. I still think he's better than Nemesis and Sons of Vodokar. But there is no way Giguna is going to, usurp Vodokar. I think Vodokar is the best boss in the game. Probably the series, given how weird Rise 1 and bad Rise 1 bosses are. Yeah, Vodokar Phase 1 is pretty friggin' good. I think it might be the best boss I've ever made. So yeah. I'm going to post a link to this tier list in the description if you want to make your own Rise of the Grunts 2 tier list. There you go. Also a link to the Discord server and a link to the Rise of the Grunts 1 boss tier list.